How much longer will this united front of the players' union stay united as bills pile up, as cars get repossessed, as they begin to get kicked out of their apartment complexes? How much longer until the 10th, 11th woman on the roster, the ones
That's
who
the
make
question keeping
$80,000?
WNBA executives up at night. Because right now the players' union is presenting a united front. 97% voted to authorize a strike. But behind closed doors, there's a ticking time bomb. Nearly two-thirds of the league's players aren't part of Unrivaled. They're not collecting those $220,000 paychecks for 8 weeks of work. They're sitting at home, watching their bank accounts shrink, while the stars at the top are financially insulated. That gap between the leadership pushing the strategy and the majority of players living with the consequences is where this whole thing could start to crack.
By the Sports Business Journal. Talks between the WNBA and Players Association have stalled, and the union's, quote, upper hand at the bargaining table is slipping as soon as the players will be faced with the question of how long they can hold out, according to Adam Minter of Bloomberg News. It is a necessary but dispiriting thought, considering that the leverage...
This isn't opinion. This is reporting. According to a new Sports Business Journal article, talks between the WNBA and the Players Association have stalled, and the union's once strong leverage at the bargaining table is beginning to slip as players confront a hard question. How long can they actually hold out? Bloomberg News' Adam Minter described it as a necessary but dispiriting realization, especially because that leverage was legitimately earned. Sports Business Journal laid out exactly why the situation is turning, and it's not encouraging for the union. Caitlin Clark's arrival created real leverage for the first time in league history, record ratings, sold-out arenas, and a massive media deal. But leverage in negotiations has an expiration date, and that clock is now visibly ticking down in real time.
Caitlin Clark showed up and they suddenly had some leverage in their pocket. Publicly, the Players Association is presenting a united front, but the outward appearance masks a complex private reality. Many players can't afford to wait indefinitely. Unrivaled provides a lens for understanding the divide. This season, 54 top WNBA hoopers, about a third of the WNBA's active rosters in 2025, are participating in Unrivaled. For them, Unrivaled and its big paychecks of roughly $220,000 for an 8-week season are a nice
while
cushion.
Negotiations drag on, the math matters. In 2025, about 54 top WNBA players, roughly a third of the league, are playing in Unrivaled, earning around $220,000 for just 8 weeks of work. That's a significant financial cushion when talks stall. But what about the other 100 players? The ones making $80,000 base salaries. The role players, the bench players, the 11th and 12th women on the roster. They don't have endorsement deals. They're not getting unrivaled contracts. And they're the ones who feel the financial pressure first, long before the stars do.
They're going to dry up on their savings. AKA, they're going to need money. AKA, they got bills. A WNBA lockout or strike also poses economical risks for the WNBA. The league is in a much stronger financial position than its players to withstand a protracted delay or cancellation. Well, no shit. Pardon my language. Duh. Now, Natasha Cloud actually spoke about this before, and we've talked about this, that the players in Unrivaled, they don't really care about the other 100 players. This is where the situation
really starts to shift. Natasha Cloud has already spoken about this imbalance, and it matters. The players involved in Unrivaled, let's be real, aren't losing sleep over the other 100 players in the league. If a lockout happens, they're insulated. They can simply extend Unrivaled, keep playing, and continue collecting checks. For them, it's manageable. But for the role players, it's a completely different story. Expenses don't pause. Rent still comes due. Car notes stack up. Credit cards max out. That financial strain doesn't take long to surface. And when it does, that 97% show of unity starts to fracture.
They just want to get paid all the money that they feel that they missed during the NIL era. That's what a lot of this is, along with ego. A lot of this is players that missed the NIL era, sees Caitlin Clark. They don't want to admit it, but she's the dollar signs here. And they say, well, this is our only chance, really.
At the core of this situation are pride and lost timing. A lot of these longtime players completely missed the nil wave. They watched college stars start earning seven figures while they were stuck playing overseas for $70,000 a year. Then Caitlin Clark arrives, and suddenly real revenue finally enters the league. For many of them, this feels like a once-in-a-lifetime window, maybe the only real shot to get paid. That's why they're going all in, pushing for 30% of gross revenue and a $10.5 million salary cap. The risk is simple, though. They may be pushing too hard and stretching their leverage beyond what the situation can actually support.
Talking about WNBA could be weeks away from delaying season. Despite releasing the schedule earlier this week, the WNBA likely needs to agree to a CBA by February to start the season on time. The WNBA wants everybody to believe the 2026 season will tip off on May 8th. It asserted as much with an announcement of a 44-game slate and a statement that explained in part the move was to allow, quote, essential planning to begin. The reality of where collective bargaining agreement negotiations stands paint a different
The league's newest
picture.
offer is far from a disaster. It includes a top salary hitting $1 million and climbing past $1.3 million through revenue sharing. The proposal gives players about 70% of net income over the life of the agreement, with a salary cap that opens at $5 million in the first year and rises alongside league growth. Compared to where things stand now, that's a dramatic jump. But the Players Association is pushing for more. They want compensation tied to gross revenue instead of net, a structural shift that isn't minor and could end up draining the league by hundreds of millions over time.
But remember, Breanna Stewart yesterday said, they're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. How can you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you liar? Whatever. In that proposal, the union is seeking a 30% share of the league's gross revenue and a salary cap of $10.5 million. The league's latest proposal includes a max base salary of $1 million, which would increase to more than $1.3 with revenue share. The league's proposing roughly 70% of its net revenue over the span of the deal. The salary cap would be at $5 million in year one.
Now,
and
let's
grow
focus
in
on
tandem.
what's truly on the line. Reporting from Annie Costabile suggests the WNBA may be only weeks away from pushing back the start of the season. Even though the league released its schedule this week, featuring 44 games beginning May 8th, the situation behind the scenes paints a much different picture. As of January 23rd, the Players Association was still waiting for a reply from the league on a proposal submitted nearly a month earlier, before Christmas. The holidays passed, New Year's came and went, and now, deep into late January, there has been nothing but silence from the league
Best
side.
case scenario for free agency would be early March, and that's if the ink dries on a new CBA by early February, giving the WNBA the rest of the month to plan and conduct an expansion draft. Multiple league sources believe the best case scenario would be early March, given the ink dries by early February. We are about 2 weeks away from early February. February's in 7 days, 8 days. 2 weeks, we're sitting what, February 5th, February 6th? They need to get a deal soon before we start pushing the schedule back.
Now, let's focus on what's truly on the line. Reporting from Annie Costabile suggests the WNBA may be only weeks away from pushing back the start of the season. Even though the league released its schedule this week, featuring 44 games beginning May 8th, the situation behind the scenes paints a much different picture. As of January 23rd, the Players Association was still waiting for a reply from the league on a proposal submitted nearly a month earlier, before Christmas. The holidays passed, New Year's came and went, and now, deep into late January, there has been nothing but silence from the league side.
However, in the middle of free agency, front offices will also be preparing for the 2026 WNBA draft, currently held April 13th. The league has never lost games to a work stoppage in its 29-year history. The next 2 weeks will be an indicator of whether its 30th season will be the first time it does. If the deal doesn't get done soon, might not be a lockout, there might not be a strike, but at the bare minimum, they're going to need to delay the season or start chopping some games off. Instead of a 44 game, it'll be a 38 game. They missed the first 6 games because they push it back 2 weeks. They mix the first 10 games because they push it back a month.
This is where Breanna Stewart's recent remarks begin to raise eyebrows. She claimed just yesterday that the sides are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But that statement doesn't line up with reality when the league hasn't replied to the players' proposal in over a month. That isn't momentum, it's a deadlock. At the same time, front offices remain completely uncertain about expansion rules. Toronto Tempo and Portland Fire are stuck waiting, unable to map out their rosters without a finalized CBA. One of the key issues under discussion is the core designation, essentially the WNBA's version of a franchise tag, and its inclusion could drastically alter which players are protected or exposed in the expansion draft, leaving teams unable to plan while negotiations remain frozen.
How much longer will that 97% of players that agreed with the strike dwindles to 90%, dwindles to 80%, dwindles to 65%? Might not be able to vote again. I doubt they can vote on that again. But the rumblings and the talk behind the scene, it'll get back to them. And they'll say, damn, we're not really united anymore. These girls fractured and they don't agree with it anymore. And they're kind of starving and they need to pay for this and she needs to pay for that. And let me know what you guys think in the comment section below.
This is where Breanna Stewart's recent remarks begin to raise eyebrows. She claimed just yesterday that the sides are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But that statement doesn't line up with reality when the league hasn't replied to the players' proposal in over a month. That isn't momentum, it's a deadlock. At the same time, front offices remain completely uncertain about expansion rules. Toronto Tempo and Portland Fire are stuck waiting, unable to map out their rosters without a finalized CBA. One of the key issues under discussion is the core designation, essentially the WNBA's version of a franchise tag, and its inclusion could drastically alter which players are protected or exposed in the expansion draft, leaving teams unable to plan while negotiations remain frozen. Several insiders around the league believe the most optimistic window for free agency would land in early March, and that only happens if a new CBA is completed by the start of February. With February less than a week away, that leaves a narrow window of roughly 2 weeks to reach an agreement, clean up the legal details, and officially sign it. After that, the remainder of February would be consumed by organizing and executing an expansion draft. Under normal circumstances, free agency opens in early January and most major contracts are finalized by early February, but the league is already far off that schedule. Training camps are set to open on April 19th. The draft is locked in for April 13th, and every unresolved delay is now stacking pressure on the entire calendar. Here's what's actually at play. If a deal doesn't come together soon, the league probably won't jump straight to a full strike or lockout, but some form of disruption is almost inevitable. At minimum, the season would likely be delayed, or the schedule trimmed from 44 games to something smaller. Maybe 38 if 2 weeks are lost, or even 34 if the delay stretches closer to a month. In nearly 3 decades of existence, the WNBA has never canceled games due to a labor dispute, but the next 2 weeks could determine whether the 30th season becomes the first. And that circles back to the real pressure point: unity. It's 97% right now, but what happens when that slips to 90, then 80, then 65? Even without another formal strike vote, internal frustration will reach leadership. At that point, the stars will realize their leverage is fading as a growing portion of the league stops supporting the strategy. And that's the uncomfortable reality for role players. They're being asked to absorb financial pain, so elite stars can push for maximum salaries they'll never touch, even though the new CBA could already raise base pay from roughly $80,000 to $250,000. That's life-changing money for a 12th woman on the roster, but only if there's actually a season to play. If the league gets locked out or the players strike, that income disappears. Their rent doesn't disappear. Their car payments don't disappear. Their student loans don't disappear. The unrivaled players can afford to wait because they make more in 8 weeks than most WNBA players earn in a full season. They can extend their season, keep cashing checks, and treat this entire negotiation like a minor inconvenience. But for the rest of the league, this is their paycheck, their bills, their livelihood. Eventually, they're going to look at Breanna Stewart, Aya Wilson, and Sabrina Ionescu and realize the truth. You don't actually care about the role players. You care about maximizing your own earnings. What makes this even more frustrating is that the league's offer is genuinely strong. Not flawless, but strong. A $1 million maximum salary is a massive increase from today's numbers. 70% of net revenue is meaningful. A salary cap that grows with league revenue means players benefit directly from growth. Yet the union is demanding 30% of gross revenue, which is a completely different calculation. Gross revenue doesn't account for operating costs, expenses, or investments in the league. It's asking for a cut of money before the league pays its bills. The NBA gives players roughly 50% of basketball-related income, but that's BRI, not gross revenue, a negotiated definition that excludes certain costs. The WNBA players are asking for 30% of gross, which in many ways is even more aggressive than the NBA's 50% of BRI once you compare the math. And they're making that demand while the league is still losing money, still being subsidized by the NBA, and still trying to become financially independent. Look, I understand why players are angry. They've been underpaid for years. They've watched the NBA earn billions while they struggled. They've had to play overseas just to make a decent living. I get it. But there's a line between fighting for fair pay and overplaying your hand so badly you end up with nothing. And right now, the union is dangerously close to crossing it. Because here's the truth. If they delay or cancel the season, they lose momentum. Caitlin Clark's rookie impact was a once-in-a-generation moment. The ratings, the packed arenas, the mainstream attention. That doesn't just pause and restart when the players are ready. Fans move on. Sponsors get nervous. The WNBA finally had mainstream traction, and they're risking it all over the difference between a good deal and a great deal. The league has more leverage than people think. Yes, they need the players, but they can also afford to wait. They're backed by the NBA. They have deep pockets. They can survive a delayed or even canceled season better than the players can. And they know it. That's why they left the union's proposal unanswered for a month, waiting for pressure to build, for cracks to show, for those role players to start asking the hard questions. The tough questions are coming. When the 10th player on a roster can't pay her car bill, she'll start asking why she's sacrificing for Breanna Stewart's huge max salary. When the 11th player gets an eviction notice, she'll wonder whether authorizing a strike was truly in her best interest. When the 12th player is surviving on instant noodles because her savings are gone, she'll realize that the unrivaled players aren't feeling any of this pressure. That's when the union's stance begins to crumble, not because the league offered something better, but because the players simply can't afford to keep fighting. And that's exactly what the league is banking on. They're playing a long game, knowing time is on their side, knowing that financial strain will eventually split the union's unity. It's cold, it's strategic, and it's likely to work. So the real question isn't whether the players deserve more money. They absolutely do. The question is whether they're willing to gamble everything they've already gained by holding out for a deal that may be unrealistic. Because if this negotiation stretches into March or April, if games start getting canceled or the season is delayed, they might look back and realize they had a solid offer on the table and let it slip away while chasing perfection. What do you think happens next? Do the role players eventually break ranks? Does the union stay strong and force the league to meet their demands? Or does this collapse into a delayed season where everyone loses? Drop your prediction in the comments, hit subscribe, and tell me if you think I'm wrong. Because one way or another, we're about to find out just how united this players' union really is.